Let's try that.
Hello.
All right, how about now? Is there an echo?
No, that's much better. Oh, and I asked you, can you see that Lisa and Diane and Paul have dialed in?
Yes. I was saying that we had 21 RSVPs, so we'll probably get more as we go along. So what I did is I sent out through the email and through the social media. I sent out basically to let everybody know that they should watch that NOVA video ahead of time. You said you weren't able to see that, and I hate to.
No, that when it run, when it ran in New Zealand, there was copyright.
Right. Well, basically, we're a local chapter of a NOVA Science Café, so we actually have an agreement with the people that make those videos.
Oh, okay.
And we're allowed to use them. So if I had known you couldn't see it for the purpose of just this meeting, I could have actually downloaded it and allowed you to stream it from the website. But
that's good to know, though, because as you know, I'm going to be back in Knoxville by March, and I'm interested in staying a part of this group. So that'll, that's good to know for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like you have your background set to where is that your university that you work at there in Canterbury?
It's the old university in the central city of Christchurch. So that's what it looked like into the early 20th century. After World War II, we moved to a much more modern looking campus out in a suburb called Ilam, but we had an earthquake in 2011 and they're rebuilding the arts quad. So it's the historical center of Christchurch. There's a lot of art galleries, wine bars, and the like. So yeah, that's the old chemistry building there of the 19th and early 20th century.
Okay. Well, let's see. This will be the first time that we've had people joining us, and I'm not talking about you, Amy, but we've had basically people that were notified through the social media that this meeting was happening, and we have one that's joining us from Las Vegas, one joining us from Georgia. So let's see. Here comes a few more. Hi, Jill. Glad you could come in. And feel free to unmute your microphone if you wish. Okay. All right. Well, we've got a total of 6 participants now. So I think we should go ahead and start the discussion. For everybody that's there, I see some microphones are still muted, but please feel free to unmute and join in. This is the STFK Science Café, sponsored by Spirit and Truth Fellowship of Knoxville. And I'm the still picture of the guy in the red shirt, David Spakes. I'm the organizer. And our topic tonight, Sci Policy, applying COVID-19 lessons to the coming flu season. And Amy, we've had this scheduled for how long? Was it back in March or so?
I think it was right at the time it was starting to really scale up, the pandemic. So yeah, it's been in the works for a bit of time.
Yeah, I think it's completely timely. It's exact. We're kind of in the spot where we expected to be as far as the basically here. We had a flat curve for a long time, but now it's beginning to rise again pretty sharply. The weather just turned very cold, and now when you go to the doctor, they're testing you for COVID and for flu at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Exactly what we thought. My doctor's office just got in the fast flu test, or the fast COVID test. So you pull up in the parking lot, and if you have symptoms, they test you while you're still in your car, and then they go inside and they get results, and within 15 minutes, they'll tell you to go home or to come in to treat your non-COVID condition.
Oh, okay.
So that's working at my doctor's office, and that may be the exception and not the rule here. I don't know how many doctors in our area have that. but perhaps others can share. Anyways, our speaker tonight, I forgot to introduce your full name, Amy Fletcher, Associate Professor, Political Science, University of Canterbury in New Zealand. So welcome to everyone. And this basically, you should have already seen the NOVA video that we would normally start our meetings with. And so I hope everybody got a chance to look at that. And so basically for the half hour that we have here, it's just going to be a question and answer. So I hope everybody thought of some good questions. Without watching the video, I'll bet you already had good questions about COVID. So why don't we go ahead and open the floor for questions. But Amy, if you want to tell a little bit about your background and what you've been doing, then I'm sure everybody appreciate to hear that.
Okay. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I got my undergraduate degree at UT Knoxville in English, and then did my master's and PhD in political science at the University of Georgia. And when I finished, there was a job opening in New Zealand for someone that could teach American government, which I can and do, and also had an interest in science and technology policy. So for the last 20 years, I've been here in Christchurch, New Zealand, teaching and doing research and moving up the academic ladder. And as of early next year, I have decided, partially because of COVID, and as my mother gets older and all of the difficulties, even from New Zealand, while it took a bit of time, up until 2020, if I needed to get home quickly, I could. I mean, it was still a 24-hour trip, but you could make it happen. You bought your ticket, you went through LA, you got to Knoxville. This year, knowing, my mother's getting older and my family's in Knoxville, Tennessee, it really started to worry me that it's become so unpredictable. As David pointed out, I thought I was coming home for Christmas, but just got an email a few months ago that said the November flights to Los Angeles were canceled. So I've been here for 20 years teaching science and tech policy, and I do have a specialization in health issues. I will note, I think David made this clear, but I am not a medical doctor. I am a political scientist and a policy person. So, on medical issues, I am not qualified. I am very interested in the social and the policy aspects of COVID and how they might relate to the flu season. And just very quickly, before we start with the questions, if anybody has them, it's been fascinating to me because I was teaching American government from July. We just finished up this year, and watching U.S. politics from here with all that was going on through the summer and then COVID and then the election, we know that it's been a really divisive time. And here in New Zealand, though, I think they deserve real credit, but I also have some observations I'm able to make if you're interested about the U.S.-New Zealand comparison. It's the case in New Zealand. This is a small country in the Pacific. If you haven't been here, it's divided into two islands, the North Island and the South Island. So it's very easy for them to close the border, which they did. By late March, the border was shut down. And the Prime Minister here does deserve credit. There's a population of about 5 million people. And in late March, early April, I believe, their motto has been go early, go hard. So they just shut the whole country down. There were 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. The government declared with 24 hours notice, we were going to be at level 4. And pretty much, unless you had a sort of essential job exemption, I spent 4 months alone in my apartment. You were allowed to walk to go get your groceries, and you had to wear a mask. So there was a 4-week period where the whole economy, the country pretty much shut down. New Zealand is seeing a few pockets of COVID resurgence. There was one recently with some sailors that came in on a merchant ship from Russia. And they are having a another factor in my travel issues, because it's expensive to travel from here. So long story short, we had a 4-week lockdown. The city of Auckland, which is their biggest city, had a 6-week lockdown. And the levels from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 have been shifting depending on the scientific information that the government is looking at. And the other aspect of the go early, go hard is that at least through February 2021, if I were to leave New Zealand, say to see my family and come back, right now, when you come back into New Zealand, unless you qualify for an exemption, and they're rare, you have to have mandatory, you go straight from the airport to a quarantine hotel. And it's a 2-week lockdown that you pay for. It's a $3,000 2 weeks in a hotel, and they test you on day 3 and day 12. So New Zealand, as a small country that is very mindful, I don't know if you've ever flown through here, but they're very serious, for example, when they say, do not bring produce through customs. You will be fined. You may be removed from the airport. So they've always been very careful with agriculture. And I sometimes have had to say to young people, you really do need to throw that apple away because you're risking, a very hefty fine bringing produce into this country. So they've always been as a small island where if something like COVID took hold, it could just blow out the whole population. So we had some pretty strict lockdown rules for over a month. The university where I teach shut completely, sent all the students home from the dorms. And through the month of May and June, we had to learn very quickly how to teach online because the university stayed closed throughout that lockdown. So don't mean to go on at length, but it's been fascinating. I'm a Kiwi permanent resident, but always an American citizen. So I've been watching the two since March, and those would be some of the major things that New Zealand did that you might be interested in. So happy to take questions, or David, take the conversation the direction you want to go, or others want to go.
Well, I've got questions like anybody else, but I'll give everybody else a chance. Hi, Megan, did you have a question?
No, I was just turning my camera on. Hi.
Okay.
Hi.
Well, welcome. Glad you can make it. Let me ask the first question then, but anyone, please feel free to jump in. So you were talking about the heavy duty lockdowns that you had there in New Zealand, in the rural areas and also in the big city. And I'm curious to know what the result of that was. And because we've had lockdowns here that they did a while and then they took away. And in Europe, they did lockdowns very heavy for a while and then tried to relax them. And I know what happened over there and here, but I'm curious about New Zealand. What did they avert disaster, or did it delay it, or what was the result?
They pretty much did. I know that Jacinda Ardern, who's she's only in her early 40s or maybe late 30s. So they have a very young, very charismatic Labour Party, which is their center left party. It would be sort of like tilting more towards the left of our Democratic Party. So they have a progressive government. She's very young relative to most politicians, quite charismatic, but she's gotten an amazing amount of both national and international praise. So you're right, I think that's been part of the issue in Britain as well, which I know has really high COVID numbers still, like certain states in the United States do. They started from the beginning, and there was some back chat. It's not as if there was some grousing about it, but when they decided we were going to level 4, it was a total lockdown that went for 4 to 6 weeks. And if you look at the numbers relative to most of the Western democracies, New Zealand is a Pacific country, but it was settled by the British, and it's a top OECD country and all that sort of thing. You'll see numbers tracking for Italy, numbers tracking for the US, numbers tracking throughout Europe and Britain. Here, boom. I would say since May, we have probably had, and those are typically people whose jobs bring them to the ports or have had an emergency exemption to come back into the country for their family. I don't think I've seen more than maybe 30 new cases in a long time. Now, there's a lot of people in the quarantine hotels because you don't have an option. You are going to be in that quarantine hotel if you want to be in New Zealand, and it's a 2-week stay. But to answer your question, if you look at the numbers, New Zealand relative to any other Western style democracy, their numbers are incredibly good. They had a very successful response to COVID relative to most other countries.
So I like to stream a radio station in the UK. I had to visit there one time and just fell in love with the town. And so it's been very interesting to hear what the public had, the strict lockdowns that the public had during the summertime. And I think they're into it again. Basically, if you have, friends come over to your house, you can all be arrested and hauled off to jail because they came in your house. That's what they're talking about on the radio, just, easy listening radio. So we've not seen that really here, although there was a business owner in New York arrested today because they opened the door of their business, but it's not been real widespread as far as I'm aware. But what I basically, from what I have followed, that as long as the lockdown in most European countries, and you could argue it's happening here in the States, basically while the lockdown is in effect, the virus doesn't spread, but as soon as it's relaxed, then the numbers go back up. And as I understand, and this is getting to the political science aspect of it, the assumption is that eventually most of your population is going to catch a certain virus, whether it's COVID or another.
Right. The herd immunity idea. Yeah.
Well, the idea is that most everyone's going to catch it, but the role of government is basically to stagger the infections so that your health system is not overwhelmed.
Yes, yeah. And that's been another issue here. Quickly on that, though, and again, I'm happy to open this up. And believe me, teaching U.S. politics abroad is a very interesting experience. I am from Tennessee. I'm American to my core, but have learned a lot over the years. And you can also see the divisiveness, but I also want to be fair to the US. New Zealand, in my opinion, should be rightfully proud of its response to COVID. And it probably has learned, both in terms of the flu season, but one of the issues I look at is what we call foresight, people who study issues and pathways and potential future problems. As early as 2007, well, I understand why politicians have to be selective. They tend to be thinking in the short to medium term. As early as 2007, you can find good published research, which says we can't predict exactly when, but the early 21st century will be the age of pandemics. We have stressed the earth. We have stressed the environment. We know we have large countries that have wet markets, and I'm not making a judgment about that, but that's the scientific reality. So this idea that, and I'm very happy that we're starting to see good news about the vaccine. But I think, as you point out, the notion that it's one and done, that we're going to solve COVID and go back to normal. I think human beings adapt. I think I'm not all doom and gloom. I don't think that's going to happen because most people who are experts in the field are saying we're now going to kind of be playing, catch up, and pandemics will be coming through at a much faster pace than they did. So governments really do need to learn from this experience, whether it's a particularly bad flu season or it's yet another pandemic. And the other thing, though, coming back to being fair to the US, your point about lockdowns, I do think New Zealand deserves a lot of credit. But as I had to remind my students, because this was such a volatile year for them to be studying US politics anyway, and they're very young, and they're not, there's so many variables in that classroom. But I did point out, I said, well, now wait a minute. In your biggest city, Auckland, your population density is about 1,400 people per square kilometer. I said, you do have to get your head around the fact that in Manhattan, it's about 30,000 people per square kilometer. I said, so it's not just that the US or Britain are inept. I said, yes, you do deserve a lot of credit for your response, but there's major differences when you're looking it's difficult for the US to shut certain borders. Our airline industry is massive. You've got the economic aftershocks. And that is also something New Zealand made a conscious decision that the only thing they cared about in 2020 were the health effects. That's their decision to make. I can understand that. And maybe Britain and the US should have done that too. That's a political question. I think New Zealand is being a bit more head in the sand about the fact that the shock to their economy from such a stringent lockdown is going to cause its own problems in 2021. So I'm not trying to take one side or the other of the political divides, but I think it, like all things political, yes, they deserve credit, but I also don't like the narrative that I've seen develop here that America was just a lost cause, because I don't think that takes all the different variables into account, if you see what I mean.
Well, I think people that have very broad-based comments of things to say about the U.S., both from outside the U.S. and within, might be influenced, by their political persuasion about who our president is.
Oh, sure, and the media.
I live Knoxville, as you know, is an area that's not densely populated. Relatively speaking, we're probably more dense than most parts of New Zealand, but we're certainly nothing like a New York. And one of the issues that we've had here is the fact that one part of the country needs to lock down tight, and another one that has much less population, not so much. But certain politicians want to treat everyone the same, and it's a cookie cutter situation. That's one of the issues here. Now, this meeting is unfortunately limited in time, so I want to give everyone a chance to at least ask one question. So I hope if you've got a question, don't be shy and ask Amy while we're still able to have the meeting. I don't know what'll happen at the end of the time period. We may be rudely cut off, but let's give it a try. Go ahead. Somebody else ask your question.
I have a question. I guess I know that New Zealand is on a fault line and has experienced in the last 10 years a couple of pretty catastrophic earthquakes, and so I was wondering to what extent that sort of emergency preparedness do you think informed the response that they gave to COVID when COVID started?
He didn't say what time, but he said he'd come.
I think we've got somebody who needs to go mute.
You know, there's things you have just dumped everything on me.
Did that take care of it? I think it did.
Okay. Megan, thank you for that. Yes, that's an excellent question. In fact, I've been here for 20 years, so I lived through the major 2011 Christchurch earthquake. My flat was destroyed. I had to live in motels. So you're absolutely right. I think part of the reason that New Zealand had part of it's they're small and they're more cohesive. It's a consensus-oriented culture as opposed to our more combative, if you will, kind of back and forth between the parties. So it's more of a parliamentary consensus system, and it's small. And you're really only 2 degrees of separation from most of your neighbors, so to speak. But getting back to your specific question, absolutely, because certainly whether it was here at local government in Christchurch or it was the federal or the central government, we learned a lot about resilience, how to help our students through a very traumatic time, how to ensure that you have to draw on people in something like a pandemic or an earthquake. And again, it was a 7.1 earthquake. It was massive and it was very, very scary. So yes, that's an excellent point as well. They have had some prior experience in rolling out these very coordinated, everybody needs to step up and do their part kind of city, local, and central coordinated effort. So I'm sure that fed into it.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. When I come back to Knoxville, happy to tell you more about the earthquake. I could talk about that all day. That was terrifying. But we got through it. It worked. Anyone else? I
just got to notice that the meeting no longer has a time limit on it. I don't know. Maybe they're listening in and they decided, hey, we're talking about COVID. We need more time. So
could be. I have a very nervy grad student who has to defend their PhD today. So maybe if people have questions, happy to go though another 10 minutes or so, if that works for you, David.
that would be absolutely fine. I appreciate your time.
Oh, no
Somebody else
problem.
with a question that hasn't asked. All right. In the moment of silence, I'll throw out a question. So, watching the Nova video yesterday, I learned something that basically they talked about the type of vaccine that is being produced. It's an RNA vaccine, and basically that class of vaccines is why the refrigeration is necessary. It's a characteristic. And so one of the things that was interesting to me about the Operation Warp Speed is what they've been calling it here, where the president was trying to cut red tape and get the funding for developing vaccines and so on. One of the aspects of that was basically they foresaw months ago that they were going to need refrigeration units that were specialized for this type of vaccine. So Project Warp or Operation Warp Speed was also getting the manufacturers of the refrigeration units to where they can start ramping up production. Have you heard of anything in New Zealand about the refrigeration units that are needed, and is the government talking about importing those or producing those? And
yes, that's just like what, and again, I can see the argument that you have to in a pandemic deal to health first, and the rest of it you're going to sort out later. But that is definitely an issue as we start to move into 2021, because New Zealand, it does have a strong public health system. Everybody has general public health insurance. And it has, a talented biotechnology sector and group of researchers. But the production of vaccines on a large scale, the need for the technology to ensure that the vaccines have their integrity and have not been compromised, yes, that is going to put New Zealand in more of an import space. And I think getting back to your question too about just the practicalities of this, my understanding from the scientific literature, whether it's New Zealand, the States, or wherever, is that they don't quite know yet. Every epidemiologist who I've read in their public-facing work, we don't quite know yet how the flu vaccine might interact with the COVID vaccine. And I think partially because we've seen it happen so many times in movies. Yes, it's great that we have a vaccine, but scaling that up to a country as large as the United States and deciding how you prioritize who does get the first round, who gets the second tranche, who gets the third one. And I know Biden's made it clear that he doesn't want any US manufacturer to also, in a sense, be hoarding them. He wants America to also be generous with other countries. So whether it's in terms of, as you say, a normal flu season can be difficult enough, particularly for people that are immunocompromised, elderly, there's a variety of risk factors. The problem now is when the flu season hits, as you point out, our hospitals are overcrowded and our doctors and nurses are exhausted. So the flu season could be not any worse than any one we've seen over the last several years, but it's just layering a flu outbreak on top of this, such a difficult year. So yeah, I think the hospital overcrowding, the exhaustion, and you see that here as well, even though they did a good job. The medical professionals, you can tell when you go into the clinic, are exhausted. And then you've got the overcrowding, and now you're right. Certainly in New Zealand, they will need to think hard about resourcing and preserving those vaccines.
Yeah, so it's not just about producing vaccines. It's about from end to end, getting them from the production facility to the people who need them. And we can hypothesize how to prioritize that or not, the most risky patients first. I know people who are in the high risk category who said they're not going to take a vaccine, so you can't force them. But it seems like basically raising your hand and say, I would like the vaccine. Let's start with that perhaps and see who wants it.
Well, you know what, and that is a good point. And I don't want to be doom and gloom, but since I study policy, that's another political aspect of this we'll need to watch. I don't want to get into the debate about whether MMR vaccines cause autism, because I know feelings run very, very high on that issue. And I do agree that parents have a right with respect to their children. I also know, because I study it, that virtually all of the scientific commentary will tell you there's not a link between MMR and autism. Why do I bring that up? Well, for health professionals, their ideal amount of vaccine coverage would be 95%, and that's where you get herd immunity. So they're already concerned, and they have been for years, that in a country like New Zealand, and I'll find this very interesting because New Zealand was very smart in a way about COVID. For a developed country, New Zealand has maybe about on average 88% take up of the MMR vaccine. And again, from a scientific point of view, that one is very well established as safe if you believe the science and the experts. So I'm wondering, like you say, many of myself, I would love for there to be a safe vaccine, and I'm the kind of person I'd be happy to put my hand up to take it. In fact, I saw a photograph today, fact check it because we're surrounded by false media, but there was it looked like it was true. And from a legitimate paper, there was a picture of President Obama, President W. Bush, and President Clinton. And apparently they've all received a first round COVID vaccine. And the picture was sort of designed to show it's safe, we've taken it, et cetera. So that's a really good point. I mean, the vaccine can only be as effective as the number of people that take it. And with so many people, and I'm not judging their reasons, but in such a divided moment, such a partisan moment, such, a difficult moment in terms of knowing what to trust with the media, I think the whole question, as you point out, of who is going to take the vaccine could get interesting, particularly if fewer people take it than we're anticipating will want it.
Yeah, there's some social engineering going on at some level. In the very beginning of this pandemic, they were telling people that masks don't work and you don't need them. And I believe that the reason that was put out was so that there wouldn't be people hoarding the masks when they were in short supply, but the essential workers needed them. That's a necessary, I guess, reason to put out a statement. Of course, now everybody's pointing fingers. Oh, everyone was telling lies in the beginning. Well, you got to do what you got to do to make sure the essential health workers got the masks. Okay, so I can understand that. I just wish they'd say it in plain English. But now we have the situation where there's a vaccine that's in limited supply. So, we hear stories about, Bill Gates is going to put, microchips in our bodies through the vaccine and silly things like that. So at some level, I think that's somebody is trying to make it where, not everybody's going to want the vaccine all at once and stagger it out. I think it's more social engineering that's happening. My theory, but maybe others would have comments about that. Amy, a moment ago, you said that you had just a limited amount of time left. Do you have time for one more question, or is
Sure.
it time for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay. Anybody else have a question that would like to ask?
I have a quick question. Is there a consensus in New Zealand that once the vaccine is available, that people will line up to get it?
I think that's an excellent question, and that in a way ties back to what David was just saying. One of the things, and then I'll come to your question, one of the things I study within health is what we call public communication of science. And I agree, David. I mean, on the one hand, I do think New Zealand made the right decision in taking a very scientific, evidence-based approach to their COVID response. Having said that, though, to me, I guess I'm a raging moderate. I can understand why some people don't have trust. And to me, you know, it's kind of total denial of science is not a good thing. But then, you know, those people that just keep shouting at certain people, trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. Well, we know science is always a process in motion. So I think getting back to where a majority of Americans, because that was one thing here, they have political debates too. They have different political parties. If I had to boil it down to one thing that would have distinguished New Zealand and its COVID response, say from the US in this moment, though I do love the United States and am happy to be an American, but if I were going to make one observation, there's still trust. There's still basic trust in the institutions, whether you voted for the government that's in power or not. So they didn't have to do a lot of heavy lifting that they were a labor government, but they had to convince the national voters, you know, to trust them as well. That basic trust in a functioning democratic system that represents in an emergency everyone. And one of the things I'm interested in studying in the future is why that is. Why is there trust here, even though they often have very big political debates? So, sir, coming back to your question, again, I think it's hard to know, because when you look again at MMR vaccines, there's a sizable number of Kiwi parents who don't believe that science. Now, maybe the reality of COVID has been so dramatic and so intense. If I were wagering, I would say it's quite probable, based on what I've seen to date, that there's enough trust in the way the government's handled this, that yes, once the vaccine becomes available, I would anticipate very wide uptake. If someone gets the idea and that takes, you know, kind of hits public scrutiny, if somebody's successful in getting the idea out that the vaccine could cause bad side effects, particularly for children, you might see New Zealand resisting that. So I would imagine there's at least going to be 85% take up. It's that other 10% that'll get you to 95% herd immunity that, based on the reaction to MMR vaccines here, I think is in question. But the trust is there, and it's been really resolute and resilient through this year.
Well, I think that's a good thing, but you know, you do realize that with the lockdowns there, they're virgin territory for the virus. I mean, there's
exactly
no unity in the nation.
That and you know, people feel very strongly about these issues, and I try to walk a balanced line in my courses. So yes, I've said already that I think they did, on balance, a very good job. I think there's two issues that New Zealand, because of the way it's approached this, has not wanted to look at. One of them is exactly what you're talking about. And you can't just say, well, now we've got a vaccine and we're going to throw open those borders. And New Zealand's a very small country that is dependent. Their tourism industry, that might not seem related to what we're talking about, but it is. Their tourism industry is the second biggest industry for New Zealand. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is about to literally die. So you're absolutely right. On the one hand, if there's not uptake of the vaccine, and because they've shut the whole thing out, they could end up increasing their vulnerability. And they're going to have to think about that, especially with letting people in. Can they revive tourism? Can they take that chance? I think the other thing, which is kind of, in a sense, relevant, I still don't think New Zealand has actually wanted to acknowledge that in 2021 and 2022, the hits to the job market. And in the last month or so, even though everything I've said about how well they handled it and the trust is true, we're starting to see, even in New Zealand, little pockets of workers starting to go to the State House and protest. because they're like, look, I'm an adult. I can't pay my mortgage. I can't pay for my kids' dentist bills. I will be mindful. I will social distance. I will wear a mask, but you have got to let us go back to work. So yeah, I think the vaccine, if they end up being this pristine little place in a world of COVID, that could backfire, as you point out, in an interesting way down the line. And I still think New Zealand has not wanted to deal to how hard it's going to be for this economy to recover.
I wish them luck.
Yeah, well, you notice I'm coming back to the States. So it's like, okay, this has been great, but kind of time for me to get back home. So yeah, I think they are going to need some luck, even though they did do a good job with the actual pandemic.
All right. I'll ask the same question again. Do you have time for another question, or do you need to go?
I can get to, yes, one more I can take. Yeah, if anybody has one.
We'll call on somebody to ask the final question, and then we'll let you go. And then I've got some announcements for everybody else about the next Science Cafe. So who will be our last question on the topic tonight? No final question.
You can do the honors, David, if you have one more.
Well, let's see. So what are you, all right, so this has nothing to do with the topic. What are you most looking forward to when you get back to the States and back to Knoxville? What's something you're missing down there that you can't wait to see? Other than seeing your parents and your family, that's assumed. So what's the second thing, I guess I should say?
Well, I suppose that I'll say two things, because one of them does involve my mom, but it's a lovely, interesting place to live, but I miss my mother's Southern cooking. They think they know how to do iced tea here. They do not. And you don't get free refills, which I'm like, what? Don't you get it? They don't know how to do pumpkin pie. They don't know how to do fried chicken. They make valiant efforts, but if you come from the States, it's like, and especially if you come from the South with my mom's cooking. So I'm really looking forward to my mom's cooking. And as beautiful as this country is, and it is, I think East Tennesseans have, I mean, I can acknowledge the beauty, but unlike people from some other less beautiful countries, I can see it and love it, but I'm really looking forward to going to Pigeon Forge in the Smoky Mountains when that's possible. I really miss that kind of beauty, because they have beautiful places here, but they don't look like the Smoky Mountains to me. So
I live in Sevier County, and I can tell you there are tens of thousands of people every week pouring in. And,
okay.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't even think there was a COVID issue, except a few of them are they walk back to their car when they go to a restaurant to get their mask because the restaurant will let them in. But other than that, you'd never know there was a COVID epidemic in the tourist area.
Okay. Well, I'll be wearing my mask, but I want to get to Pigeon Forge as soon as possible.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Amy, we really appreciate you. Looking forward to you, being here and seeing you in person. We found a location. It's actually a movie theater in Halls that basically they can't make money showing movies anymore. So that basically they have it set up as a place where people can have private parties, and they sanitize everything, wash with bleach, they rope off, the seats for social distancing, and so it'll be a safe place for us to do science cafes into the next year, even if there's still the pandemic going on, as long as we're allowed to gather with masks and things like that. We're planning to do the in-person part again while still doing the Zoom meeting as well. Have that be a part of it as well. But we look forward to having you sometime towards the start of spring there, so yeah, I appreciate your participation today, and looking forward to meeting you in person in the coming days.
Well, before I click off, thank you so much. I do like talking with people about these issues. And David, if anybody, I see a few things in the chat that I didn't get a chance to address. No worries if not, but if anybody wants my email, you've got my Proton Mail account email. I'm always happy just to have an individual chat, because I know some people don't feel as comfortable as others in asking a question in a forum like this. So if anybody's got questions that didn't get answered, or just things you might want to say or inquire about, if you get my email from David, feel free to email me. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'll if it's all right, I'll send out your email address to those that RSVP'd and
That's fine.
most
Yeah.
of which is okay. I'll do that then. Again, thank you, and
Thanks so
have a
much.
good rest of the warm summer
Bye-bye.
day now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, before we go, I just wanted to let everybody know I appreciate your participating with these with the virtual meetings. I swore we were going to always have an in-person component, but it just didn't work out, particularly this month since her flight was canceled. She was originally going to be visiting her family for Christmas. When we do have the in-person meetings again over at the movie theater, I'm actually planning that the virtual attendees will be displayed on the big screen. So it'll seem like everybody will be in the same room at the same time. We're trying to work out the technical details of that, but it's looking good. We do have a speaker right now that's scheduled for January. The date is January 21. It's a meeting that was supposed to happen at the Bearden Library last year, and we had to reschedule it, not because of COVID, but because one of the libraries broke a pipe or something and flooded, and so they just shut all the libraries down. So the speaker is a University of Tennessee professor in Department of Physics, Jan Manik, and the topic is self-organizing processes, and he studies bacterial cells. So if you go on the website, you can see the flyer that we had for the previous meeting that was rescheduled, and you can see that. Right now, the flyer still says we'll be at the Bearden Library, but I'll be updating that pretty soon. For probably in January, it'll still be a virtual only meeting. So we'll do at least one more like this. But I'll keep everybody updated. Just out of curiosity, did everyone get a chance to watch the NOVA video before you joined in the meeting? Looks like everybody's nodding their head yes. Okay, well that's good. That's something that we were trying to figure out how to do, since these Zoom meetings are time limited. So I'm glad that worked out well. And is anybody, it's their first time joining us at the Science Cafe? Okay, Megan, and well, Veronica, yeah. So we're very glad to have you join us. We've been doing this since 2011. We started in April of 2011 and try to do them monthly with a different speaker, different topic every month. This is actually our first political science topic, and but from all branches of science, physics and bacteria for January. Last month we had an animals and conservation science where we were talking about a species of amphibian that is in Tennessee. We've had emergency preparedness with aircraft was in February. The geology of Iceland was this past March. So just all different kind of topics. If you know anyone that is either doing research, or they're in academics or in the medical field and they're studying something and they'd like to talk about what they're researching, please point them at me. I'm all the time looking for speakers, and if you have suggestions or things that you'd like, topics that you would like to see discussions done on, email me, and I'll be on the lookout for someone to talk about that. So that's basically all the comments I've got. Anybody want to say anything before we close the meeting for tonight?
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about this organization, like your goals and such?
So the Science Cafe is, we are a local chapter of a national network of science cafes that was created by WGBH in Boston. That's the television station that produces the NOVA program for public television. And so they basically started a grassroots efforts of science discussion. And so, being a chapter of their organization, we follow their meeting format. For the in-person meetings, they suggest you meet at a bar or someplace that serves beer. We changed that a little bit in that we want to have a component for parents of young children to come, so it's a little more family friendly. We meet in libraries, we meet in community centers. Probably early next year, we'll be meeting in a movie theater. And so we do the Science Cafe in those types of environments and do the same discussion they would in a beer hall. But then we have a separate area set aside where the kids can meet. So they start out with the parents watching some clip of a NOVA program, and then the kids move into a separate area, and they have what we call Kids Cafe. It's a science lesson on the same topic, but basically at their younger age level, targeted for them. And then we have hands-on activities that help reinforce that. So it's learning for young people, and we want to encourage young people to be interested in science as well. Like I said, we've been doing the Science Cafe since 2011. It surprises some people to know, but it doesn't change the way that we operate or anything. When I'm not, I work as a computer programmer for a living, and that's how I put bread on the table in my house. I'm also a volunteer pastor at a Christian church that meets in the area, and actually our church sponsors the Science Cafe. So when we have to rent a location, or if we basically have snacks and drinks and stuff, a lot of times that's our church that's paying for that. It's a science friendly church. You can click onto the web page for the Science Cafe, and there is a link. The church also sponsors other area science activities in town. So the website for the Science Cafe is knoxsciencecafe.org, and the church is called Spirit and Truth Fellowship, and it's spiritandtruth.net. So some of you have gotten an email from me. It said Spirit and Truth on it. That's why that is. That's my email address with the church there. But this is not a religious activity at all. It's just about real science discussion, and something I really enjoy doing, and everybody else that joins in. I hope that you have that same passion for wanting to become more familiar with science and become more rounded individual, and again, getting the young people interested in science. So did that answer your question? Do you have any other follow-up to that?
Yeah, I was curious about the science and the spirit and truth component of it. So thanks for clarifying that.
Okay, well,
you're
very
how it
well.
all fit together. So
yeah, we do send out an email one time a year, basically in the interest of disclosure. In fact, I'll probably be sending it in the next couple of days. Basically, the Science Cafe has a mailing list of about 800 people, and then we've got about 800 followers on social media. And so I send out a message one time a year about this time at the end of the year, just to make sure everybody is aware of that fact, because we don't want to hide it, but we're not an in-your-face kind of church. So basically, we just want to let people know that is the case. And some people get offended and they leave. I'm not sure why, because we never really bring this up. I'm only doing so right now because you asked the question. But I'm glad that helped you with the understanding of that. And again, if you want to, you can go to the Science Cafe website, and then I think there's a link at the top that if you want to read more, you can click on that link and find out more. Anyone else got a comment or question before we go? Lisa, if you're trying to say something, I see your box light up, but your microphone's muted. Let me click this link, so maybe you'll get a button. Oh, okay, yeah. I see a comment from Lisa that, okay, your box lit up, Lisa. I just thought you were trying to say something. Anyone else? Okay, well, again, I appreciate everyone joining in, and we'll be doing this again on January the 21st. So I'll be sending out an announcement about that right after the new year. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We appreciate you. Have a good evening and happy holidays.